If you have developers deploying their applications to Kubernetes, I'm sure you've run into questions like, is there a dashboard for Kubernetes? Or how can I see the status of my applications? Or what are the objects related to my application? If you're on the ops side, I'm sure you can run into trouble identifying application dependencies, ownership, and more. So how can you solve that? If you're managing Kubernetes clusters or scaling Kubernetes across different teams in your company, I'm sure you have heard your developers ask questions like, is there a dashboard for Kubernetes? Or how do I see the status of my applications once deployed? Or even what are the objects related to my application so I can properly support them? Services Pro is real, and as you scale the number of developers deploying apps across multiple clusters, you will inevitably face challenges in identifying things such as service ownership, dependencies, and more. We're just rolling out an application discovery functionality in Shippa, where you can use a Shippa policy framework to map existing applications, quickly surface them using Shippa's dashboard, and answer these questions. Here's what we'll need. A Kubernetes cluster. I'm going to use an existing GKE cluster I have, and a Shippa Cloud account. That's it. Let's get started. Great, so I already have my Kubernetes cluster created. I'm using GKE, but you can use AKS, EKS, whatever K in the middle you have there. And if I just see get nodes, you can see my node already running there, and get namespace. You can see that I have a namespace called blog. So, and if I say get pods, you're gonna see that I have a WordPress running. So I installed, or a developer installed that WordPress application before using Helm chart. But right now it's just here. I don't want to give my developers kubectl access. But how do they understand the application? How do they visualize and so on, right? So let's get started. So that's what I have set up here. I have access to my Kubernetes, and there is already a blog namespace, and there is a WordPress app installed in that namespace. On the other screen, I have my Shippa Cloud account, and I'm logged into my dashboard. If you don't have a Shippa Cloud account yet, shame on you. You can get one for free, and you can get started by going to apps.shippa.cloud. I'll leave the link here, but apps.shippa.cloud, pretty easy. The first thing we're going to do is create a policy framework. If you're not familiar with policy framework, is the way we as DevOps, we can define rules and guardrails and controls around applications that are deployed. So if we come into the advanced view, we can see things such as resource consumption, access control, registry control, and more, right? So how do I get here? I come into frameworks on the left menu, create framework. And since we're targeting the app discovery portion, app discovery is only available in the advanced view. So as we switch over to advanced, the next thing I'm gonna do is give that policy framework a name. So I'm just gonna say WordPress. I'll keep provisioner Kubernetes. I'm binding this policy framework to a Kubernetes cluster. But one thing that is important now is it is not required by default because you don't need one, and it's a namespace. If you don't specify a namespace, when you bind that policy framework to your cluster, Shippa will automatically create a namespace. So it would be called Shippa-WordPress. But because we want to use our policy framework to map existing apps, I need to point that policy to use an existing namespace. So in our case, it's going to be blog. Easy, right? Basically getting what I have here from my kubectl. Awesome. So let's go back there. I'll just click on next. I'm not going to cover all the details from a framework perspective, a policy framework. I can do another video on that. But plan, I'll just keep it as default. I'll make it public so anyone in my Shippa Cloud account can see and use that framework. Application scalability limits, registry control. I don't want to set anything. I don't want to set default network policy. I'll disable any security scans right now. I don't want to set anything. But here comes the part that matters to us, right? The app discovery. Here we need to inform Shippa the label that we want Shippa to scan for in our blog namespace, so Shippa can find the application, the required objects, and bring the map. How do we do that? Let's go back to our terminal. Here I have my, oops, if I can type. I have my 2 pods running, right? One for MariaDB and the other one for WordPress. They were, it was installed using Helm. But if I do kubectl describe pod, for example, my release, and then in namespace blog, if I go up here to the top part, I can see labels. So that's what we're gonna use today. I can see that there is a label called app.kubernetes.io name. And if I do the same with my WordPress pod in the blog namespace, and if I go up, I can see the same thing, app.kubernetes.io. So because I want to map my entire WordPress application, including the database and so on, I'm going to use a label that is common for both services. If you have specific labels for specific services in that namespace, you can be selective, right? But just as an example. So I'll come in here and I'll copy this. Now going back to my Shippa Cloud account, that's the label I'm gonna enter. The naming suffix is, for example, here we have 2 pods, right? One for MariaDB and the other one for WordPress. If I don't enter a suffix in this case for the 2 pods, Shippa will use the names used by your pods in this case, purely when creating the applications. But if you come in here and say Shippa, for example, then Shippa, when Shippa brings in or imports the applications, Shippa will use Shippa-MariaDB, for example. I'm gonna leave it empty. It's not required, just to make things easier. All right, so our WordPress policy framework is here, but nothing is happening, right? I'm not binding, I haven't bound that policy to a cluster yet. So let's do that. If you come here to cluster, you can find detailed information on how to bind your clusters using our documentation. I'm gonna leave the link here, but it's basically under learn.shippa.io. And in Ops Guide, you have Kubernetes clusters as a section, and you have connecting clusters. I'll make this larger so it's easier, right? Great. When I start connecting my cluster, I'm gonna need the cluster name, which I can just say existing app. And then the framework I wanna bind to that cluster. So I'm gonna use the WordPress framework that we just created. The next thing is Shippa is gonna need access to your cluster. So Shippa can map the objects, deploy apps, and so on and so forth, right? And that's the part that you can follow the instructions here from the document. So the first part of the document is telling us cluster connection, how to find the IP for our cluster. So I'll copy this. I'll come here and I'll use this. Great, that's my cluster IP. And no need to go nuts over it. By the time you guys see this video, everything's gonna be deleted anyways. So the cluster token, right? For Shippa to access your cluster, Shippa will need a service account. So Shippa can access that cluster. Here's a definition of a service account that you can use. I already have that file here. So I'll just use kubectl and apply that file to my cluster. Okay, that is there. The next step is for us now to grab the token related to that service account. So which you can find here on step number 3 in the document. And then I'll come here and do this. Then I can find the token, right? So I created a service account and I found the token for my service account. If I come in here now, going back to my Shippa dashboard, I can enter the token. And the last step I need is to enter the certificate for that account. Again, by the time you folks see that, it's going to be deleted. And you can retrieve the certificate using step number 4. So let's go back here. Okay, my certificate is here. And then I can go back and enter my certificate here. The next part, I don't need to do anything. This is just if you want to use any custom ingress config. I'm just gonna use the default ones and it should work fine. The cluster connection takes about 45 to 60 seconds. You can see if it's working in your events page and you can see the cluster as running. So let's just wait. As soon as we add the cluster, we can see that kubectl, let's go back to our screen. And if we say kubectl get namespace, you can see that Shippa creates a namespace. If we go back to our Shippa dashboard, I can already see my MariaDB and I can see my WordPress applications. Awesome. And you can give this access to your developer. If your developer has access to the WordPress policy framework, when they log in, they can see the MariaDB and the WordPress apps. Now you can see your existing application, who it belongs to, where this is located. You can see the units related or the containers related to that service. And you can see the dependency map. So now your developers can quickly see their applications. And you as an ops team, you can actually know who owns the service, dependencies, and all. I hope that was helpful, and we would love to hear from you. Participate, join our Slack channel, and we look forward to working with you. Thank you.